just like, you know, the junior units, just like border lodging, and any of the like non, you know, if it's not a single family home, it's typically going to be a separately regulated use. Same thing with guest living quarters. So it's just going to be in its own category now. So that kind of helps clear things up as far as some of the conflict that was arising due to the ordinance that was passed previously. So moving on to council, in the next couple of weeks, it should be, the new ordinance will separate that. So that's a big kind of win for just making sure that everyone's on the same page. Looking at the ordinance itself that went through the planning commission, there was one thing that didn't get added in there that there's been some questions about. I'll kind of go through some of the major stuff that's happening. The big question is regarding coastal development exemption for ADUs. The draft that went through planning commission included an exemption for attached ADUs, not an exemption for detached ADUs. It was not an intentional. It was not intentional that it go through that way. It was a mistake by staff at the city. Spoken to Gary since then, and he's let me know that it's going to be included when it goes to council. The reason why that's important is we don't know for sure if the state's going to allow us to have that exemption for detached ADUs yet. There's been some pushback, primarily concerned about things on like coastal bluffs, things, first roadway from the water, areas where you would still want to have a CDP required. So the plan, as it sits right now, is to take the full exemption to council, send that up to coastal, and negotiate down from there. So we're asking for everything, and we're negotiating down to what we want. So at the very least, they've indicated that they are 100% okay with conversions and attached ADUs, getting an exemption, a CDP exemption. The big question comes down to new detached ADUs. So some of the things that we're proposing as solutions is to, if they are not going to let that happen, we're proposing that we require CDPs for lots that fall into multiple overlays. So if it falls into the coastal overlay and like a coastal bluff or an environmentally sensitive, those kinds of things. That's what we're pushing for as the compromise, so that we can still get detached ADUs exempted. So that's the kind of big thing that was missed going through the planning commission. Any questions on that before I move on?
Sure, I just have one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you, I'm not hearing everything because I'm on the road. I'm not hearing very well, but did they address the installation requirements or the setup requirements on tiny homes as it relates to utility?
No.
That type of thing?
Not in this housing package. So this housing package has been something that's been in the works for a while. And with the changes to the ADU ordinance, it was necessary for them to fix that portion of the definition of the movable tiny home. So that, other than that, there isn't any clarifications that I've seen on the utility connection. That's still something that needs to be worked out on the process. So there's still things that need to happen on the movable tiny home. And I think that's happening through the typical processes of the city as they set up the information bulletins and all that kind of stuff for how these are actually going to work.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Chris is asking when the city vote is.
I don't see it on the council schedule yet. I've heard from Chris Ward's office that it's just being reviewed now. I expect it to probably be at the end of this month for the first reading. We'll have to see how quickly they decide to take it up. I'm pushing for it to, obviously, the sooner the better. So we don't have that answer yet. All right, so moving into kind of the key things that are being changed in the ordinance in San Diego. One of the biggest kind of technical wins that is underrated, but it's been something I've been fighting for the last 3 years, is the term companion unit is dead. We don't have confusion anymore between companion unit and accessory dwelling unit. They're adopting the state terms and state definitions, which just makes it easier for talking to homeowners and working through the process. So some of the other big changes, essentially the ordinance is designed to fall in with state law, but it also goes above and beyond in a couple of key ways. The first is parking. So essentially, this is similar to what happened in La Mesa a couple of years ago. When you actually look at the parking regulations and current exemptions for ADUs, the amount of ADUs that could ever have a parking requirement is a small percentage of the overall units that are built. So instead of having complex parking regulations with multiple exemptions in place and making it difficult for people to understand, the city is removing all parking requirements for ADUs in the city of San Diego. So that includes like a garage conversion, you don't have to replace for state law already. But a new detached ADU, regardless of whether or not it's within half a mile of transit, there would be no parking requirements for those ADUs. Expect us to get a lot of pushback on that item. And I'm actually really hoping that that's the item that the NIMBYs decide to focus on. There's some additional areas where they've gone above and beyond the state rules, primarily when it comes to incentives for low-income ADUs. So the city is allowing in the TPA, which is a transit priority area, that for every deed restricted ADU, restricted moderate income and lower, you can have one additional ADU on site. And there's within the TPA, there's no limit to the number of ADUs that you can create out there. So this is important when we look at, moderate income and what that pencils out to on a unit for 2 people, pencils out to about $2,600 a month. So when we look at how that's going to affect these penciling out for developers or penciling out for investors, it's going to start penciling out on a lot more sites than it has in the past. So within the TPA, you can do, yes, I see you there. Wow. Within the TPA, it's unlimited. You're still going to be limited somewhat by the floor area ratio. Outside of the TPA, you're going to be limited to just one additional. So essentially it's the standard ADU. If you restrict it, then you get one more, so you get 2 ADUs. So when we talk about how
when you say deed restricted, are you talking about deed restricted to Section 8 housing ADUs?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I can pull it up here. Got it in front of me, but yeah, so it's deed restricted. It can be low, very low, or moderate income. So when I said floor area ratio somewhat affects So as you guys know, state law says that regardless of FAR, they have to at least allow for an 800 square foot ADU. There's been some discussion back and forth with the city of San Diego on what that meant. They finally just came around and agreed that that means that if you're at your FAR or close to it, you'll still be allowed to add an ADU of up to 800 square feet. So essentially, regardless of whether or not the property is maxed out on floor area ratio, you can still get an 800 square foot ADU. That's where, you know, if we're talking about deed restricting and adding as many units as possible, you're going to come up to a point where you have you hit that limit for FAR, and then you get one more. So those are two important ones. The other important issues or important areas where it goes above and beyond the state law is in the multifamily side. This is, you know, we can talk about how multifamily can get 2 additional detached ADUs, multifamily being 2 or more connected dwellings. The state law allows for conversion of non-habitable spaces up to 25% of the number of units. So if I have 4 units over garages, I get 1 more unit that I can convert from those garages. If I have 5 units, I can get 1 more unit. It does not round up. Where the city of San Diego is going above and beyond, yes, we got to get to 8 units before it becomes 2. City of San Diego is going above and beyond by saying that if you have multifamily dwelling, you can convert that 25% is out of habitable space. So a duplex can be reconfigured into a triplex. A 4 unit can be reconfigured into a 5 unit. And the conversion of non-habitable accessory spaces. So in that example of 4 units above garages, now those 4 units can become 5 just in the unit, and I can convert the garages into as many ADUs as I want. So there's no limit to the conversion of non-habitable accessory spaces that are connected to multifamily. This is really big. You guys are trying to understand why I'm really helping everyone jump on the no parking issue, because that's huge. Yeah, the no parking is really the tip of the iceberg, but it's what all of the NIMBYs are going to be looking at as far as how it affects them in their backyard. One thing I do want to just kind of caution everybody on when we talk about duplexes, I'm running into this currently in a number of different jurisdictions where we've got duplexes over garages, and we're converting those garages to ADUs. There's still a discrepancy between ADU law and building officials. So building officials and fire, they're going to require you to do occupancy change there from R3 to R2. And what that means is that your construction costs for that garage conversion are going to be a lot higher. You're going to have to go to you're moving from a CRC, California Residential Code, to CPC, which brings in accessibility provisions as well as a dedicated fire sprinkler service. So it's not off the same meter anymore. It's going to be a separate meter for the fire sprinklers. So it is increasing the cost on these. We hope to have something that will get implemented in probably 2022 in order to fix that. But just a word of warning for anyone looking at duplexes going to a duplex plus ADU, there you are going to run into issues with occupancy changes. So there's lots of kind of other smaller things that are in the ordinance, mostly just fall in line with state law. Still, you know, JADUs are still a thing, although they still require owner occupancy. So when we talk about, you know, the opportunities here, it's really kind of JADUs are, you know, shifting away from being really valuable because there's still a conversion of existing space. With these new rules in the city of San Diego, there's a lot of different opportunities that is much larger. So,
Jared, can I ask you a quick question on that, just to make sure I'm tracking that right? For the duplexes, you're saying that if someone wants to add an ADU to a duplex, it's basically going to force them to change it to a commercial zoning now?
Not commercial zoning. So this is talking about building code.
Okay. So
it has nothing to do with zoning. It's all about the code that's applied. So when we talk about single family and duplex, we're talking about California residential code. I don't have any accessibility provisions that come into play there. I don't have, it's a different code. And so when I move to 3 units, we're talking about attached. It's not a duplex with a detached unit. We're talking about attached. So 3 units attached. Moving into the CBC pulls in accessibility provisions as well as different fire separation issues. The big difference on the sprinklers is that it moves from your standard single family system to a multi-family system with a dedicated service. And so your cost for that is going up dramatically. And so we're working with jurisdictions on like individual fixes. For the time being, that's going to be until at least 2022. That's going to be how we have to deal with those because there's no there's enough of a flexibility in the state law to provide that building officials can do that. So what we found is we have gotten some exemption for upgrading to a different type of fire sprinkler system. So for instance, I have a duplex with a garage that is, we're converting that garage instead of requiring me to fire, and the existing duplex is not sprinkled. So if it were a true occupancy change and they were forcing me to go through everything needed, I would have to provide fire sprinklers for the existing unit, change the fire separation between the existing units and between the new units, and that would all be a much larger, construction cost than just the garage conversion. So what they're doing for us is they're allowing us to, in certain circumstances, to look at the unit itself and how we can provide enough, fire life safety protection for the unit in order to, it's essentially an alternative methods and materials type of a review. Just basically working with the fire marshal and the building official directly on, what we can do on specific properties, but it's popping up all over the place.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yep. So yeah, there's multiple. Yeah.
Hey, Jared, can I ask you a quick question in regards to the, this is Sydney, in regards to the discount or whatever a builder would receive in regards to rents being essentially at, for whether it's Section 8 or it's, a cap on the rent. How would that funnel through as far as, and what's that time period? Is that for 5 years? Is that for 10 years? I'm just looking at it on an appraisal standpoint. If I'm looking at income coming in, if there's, like in some places, there's a lock on the rent where you can't go up above a certain amount, that's going to change value. So how does that funnel through down to either the lender, the appraiser, the knowledge of if there's some sort of, cap on what that homeowner or investor can receive?
Yeah, so it would be a deed restriction. It's 15 years, which when you look at typical deed restricted housing, it's amazing that it's only 15 years. I mean, we've seen stuff, 45, 50 years. So it's a 15-year deed restriction. And as far as how you would know if a property had that on it, personally, I don't have a window there, so it's not my, area of expertise. It would be, on the deed, so, but the key is that it gives you the opportunity for not only very low and low income, but also moderate income, which is 30% of 110% AMI. So for two people, that comes out to $2,600 a month. Obviously, you can, family of four, it's going to be higher, but more just I'm showing like kind of the cap of what that rent would be for a typical two-person household for an ADU.
So Meredith or anybody else that wants to chime in, I would guess that one of the concerns might be if buyers are looking at units and there's a potential deed restricted versus an unrestricted ADU on a property, that would become one of the early questions and answers in the purchase phase. So how is this going to be obvious information, in the deed and the title? How do we find that information? And
the other thing is we're gonna be looking at essentially you're gonna see this on lots where there's more units than is allowed by zoning. So because these don't go through the typical, I don't have to, match the density for the lot. These are going to be you're going to see these as newly built units. And you're going to see them primarily on lots where there's density that is allowed by current zoning. So.
Hey, so let me just chime in on the deed restrictions, because thanks to Henish, big ups to Henish. Woo woo. So in the city of Anaheim, I'm currently the one that is doing the administrative granting suites to ADU conversions. And so how that deed restrictions come up is literally when I pulled a permit that was filed with the city. So in these specific instances, these granted units have 12 unique deed restrictions that truly make them a grant unit, meaning they're not rentable. You've got to be of a certain age. You've got to be related. It's on and on. It's like crazy stuff.
This is not that. This is through the housing commission. This is strictly
a low-income deed restriction on the rental of those units. It has nothing to do with age or rentability. That has nothing to do with it. This is strictly through the San Diego Housing Commission.
So you would see those, I believe you would see that on the title report, especially in a purchase, correct, Jeremy, James? I mean, that's something that would certainly have to be disclosed by any realtor selling the property, because that's a big deal.
So in the Housing Commission's placement, if you will, an agreement on the deed restriction on the property, obviously the intent is to get housing for very low income or low income personnel. So what is the Housing Commission giving up to put this on the title? Is there a reduction in taxes, fees, building costs? What is the homeowner getting?
The benefit is for every deed restricted unit, you get one more.
So it's purely in numbers.
If I have a single family home and I can currently build one detached ADU on the lot, now I can build 6 detached ADUs on the lot.
Linda, that would be very interesting from an ROI perspective, looking at what those options would be.
And if I do build 6 detached ADUs on the lot, 5 of those are deed restricted, 1 is not.
And the question was asked earlier regarding Section 8. So this is actually based on AMI. It's not Section 8 purely speaking, right? It's just based on AMI, which has variations outside of Section 8.
Right. And that's why they talk about it being, very low, low, and moderate. So it's not, it's not strictly Section 8.
Okay. Jared, Paul, these have all been really good notes, Jared. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put together some minutes, so to speak, and I'll send them off to you, and you can finesse them, add and subtract as you will, and we'll make sure we get this information out.
It looks like we've got a question from Rogelio about JADUs detached from the single family. So, all right, so yes, we will be able to do a JADU that is, so, okay. This is something that I've had numerous conversations with Gary about. So as it sits right now, the definition of a junior accessory dwelling unit allows it to share bathing facilities with the primary. And that's why it's always been restricted to attached within the primary. And so the City of San Diego in the new ordinance allows it to be a conversion of a detached accessory structure, but it's going to be a requirement that that JADU then has its own bathing facility. So it's not specifically written into the ordinance. There's a lot that they're relying on internal policy for, which is a little frustrating. If they put everything in the ordinance, it would, be 400 pages long. So some of it's going to be policy. We've talked about the detached JADUs. Also, a JADU could be within an ADU. The issue becomes the JADU is supposed to be a conversion of an existing space. So we're still waiting to see how they're going to handle a proposed ADU with a JADU in it. Because technically that shouldn't be allowed, but it's going to be kind of sorted out as we go through.